Hello, everybody. I'm Josh Welsh, president of Film Independent, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to be here today with our Coffee Talk program with a very special guest, filmmaker, Olympic athlete, author, actor, and so much more, Alexi Pappas. And Alexi is also, of course, an alum of the LA Film Festival with her first film, Tracktown. And Alexi, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited and honored to have you here talking about your new book, which I will hold up here, Bravey. So it's great to see you.
It's amazing to be here. And I feel, especially grateful because, something I wrote a lot about in the book, and I know is how much it means to me when people I admire believe in me. And the truth is that one of my very first, meaningful film experiences was thanks to your belief in me back in 2016. So I with Tracktown movie, and I think that that has stuck with me, and so I'm grateful that you took the time to read and that we're here on our coffee talk together.
Excellent. Well, before we start, I just want to say to people in the audience, if you have questions throughout, just put them in the Q&A button at the bottom and we'll get to them towards the end of the conversation. I also just want to say, so for anyone tuning in who maybe isn't familiar with Film Independent, we are a nonprofit arts organization based in Los Angeles that supports the independent film community, both filmmakers and film lovers. Which is how I got to know Alexi a few years back with her first film. So this is a conversation, the book deals with so much beyond film, but I'm really excited to be here to have this conversation about the film part of Alexi's life, but all the rest of it too, and how I think it's really interesting how these different things inform each other. So Alexi, I have a feeling a lot of our audience today is going to be, it's from the filmmaking community. So my questions might skew in that direction. But just to start off, I want to ask you about the impetus to write this book. And, before I started it, I assumed that it was going to be all written pre-COVID. But then in the book, you referenced the pandemic. So obviously you were writing it in the midst of what's going on. So what was your original idea like to do the book, and when did that process start?
Yeah, it felt a lot like, it's somewhat like the filmmaking process, in that you have the seedling of an idea and you wonder if now's the right time to make it happen, if it's possible, and this and that. And I think the book in particular was something that I realized I could uniquely speak to different experiences I had in a way that might go beyond what I could share on social media. And I think, social media is a wonderful place to share, but it is so fragmented. And so often we see people on social media and we see them like the product that they've become, but we don't understand how circuitous the process might have been. And mine was really circuitous. And I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write it, because a young me might have assumed certain things about an older me. And when I was growing up, I didn't have some of the mentorship I would have liked in a mother, and I looked to other people as my mentors. And so I imagined that maybe this book could help someone who felt something like I felt when I was younger, just looking for vocabulary, to see the world differently, and also experiences that show that you can kind of craft a life, not just like follow a path or live a life, Uh-oh, you're muted. It's okay.
I should know better. One of the things I love about the book is how you write about your younger self or your younger selves with so much, it's so thoughtful, and you're really looking back at what you were going through, but you write about yourself with so much compassion. And it's a really remarkable aspect of the book. And you write about other people in your past, even people who might not have, you might have had some issues with, or there were problematic aspects, but you write about them with compassion too. We can come back to that, but I just Well, maybe to start, before we get into a conversation, for people who haven't read the book, I'd love it if you would read from the introduction a little bit, just to give a sense of your voice and kind of set the stage for us before we go further.
I will do that. All right. Okay, so this is from the introduction of Bravey. This comes right after Maya Rudolph's foreword, which I also really love. Okay, so introduction, be a Bravey. Here's a part of it. I was born in Berkeley, and I grew up in a safe slice of suburbia outside of San Francisco with my remarkable father and loving older brother. But despite the privilege and security of my upbringing, my bright future was not guaranteed. My first 5 years of life coincided with my mom's last. Shortly after I came into the world, my mom became so mentally ill that she had to be hospitalized. For all I know, I was the last straw that sent her over the edge. I am always saddened by the sense that I came at just the wrong time. She was diagnosed as bipolar with manic depression, and after developing an addiction to pain pills originally prescribed to treat a back injury due to pregnancy complications, she became suicidal, unsuccessfully at first, and then eventually successfully. But my mom succeeded in other things long before she succeeded at suicide. She was an accomplished athlete and one of the first female software consultants at her company. What I now understand is that a successful person can be successful in anything, the good and the bad. This is both empowering and heartbreaking. Living with my mom for my first 5 years of childhood forced me to learn how to survive in a different way. I had an awareness of just how extreme life can be. Like all kids, the thing I wanted most in the world was attention. But when you're a toddler and the person throwing temper tantrums in your house is your mom instead of you, attention is hard to come by. It was easy to feel like I didn't matter. When I saw how my dad and the parade of doctors were always crowding around my mom and paying attention to her, my 4-year-old brain could only think, why don't people pay attention to me like that? It wasn't that my dad didn't want to give me all the attention in the world, it was just that he couldn't. All of my early memories, even the happy ones, are tinted with this feeling that I'm the least interesting thing in the room. Mattering taunted me because it felt like it was not for me. I remember feeling desperate to do whatever it took to get the attention I craved. And so I decided I would need to become the most interesting thing in the room. I decided that even though I didn't matter enough for my mom to choose to stay with me, I would matter to everyone else. I would become great. I translated my internal desires into external effort. I would learn in time how painful and unsustainable it is to be fueled by trauma like this. But I am where I am because of it.
Thank you. Beautiful. So what I mentioned before at the beginning that, to me, in your voice, the way you write about yourself, that you really write about your childhood experiences and growing up with so much compassion for the person that you used to be. And I'm curious if that was, I don't know how to phrase this question, but do you think you grew up with a sort of self-awareness? Were you a self-reflective kid? Or was this something that you really came to through writing this book where you were like spending a lot of time thinking back on it and came to that view of yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we are all more proud of ourselves in retrospect than in the moment. I don't know if you feel that way yourself, but I think it's hard to be, even when you think about like a film that you make, you're only when you're so close to it, you're only like, well, we could have done this differently or this. But in five years later, I'll look back at a movie and be like, wow, that was, I'm prouder today than I was then. And I think likewise, with a memoir, the person writing the book is wiser and has perspective that the person in the book doesn't have, right? And so I do think that I'm more compassionate in retrospect, and that also applies to my understanding of my mom, and that more had to do with how my experiences of the world changed how I felt about her. But in terms of how I felt about myself, I think I was more self-aware than a lot of kids, and that's because I was presented with a situation when I was little where, my mom was basically unable to be there for me. And so I felt that that meant that I needed to be there for myself more and that I needed to navigate the world differently. Um, but I don't know that I felt as much like kindness towards myself as much as I was like, I need to like figure this whole thing out, like this world. I need to figure out what it is to be an adult person. I need to figure out what I want to be because I don't know who I would like to be like. So it was more like a survival mentality
Hmm.
than, um, but in retrospect, I find it all very more amusing, maybe.
Um, one of the early chapters in the book that I just love is on mentorship. And you talk about, I mean, picking up on what you were, what you just read about your mom, you talk about the need for female mentorship and how you really sought that out and just mentorship in general. And it's kind of a theme that runs throughout the whole book. And when you're talking about your relationship with coaches and different people, and even Maya Rudolph, a chapter towards the end, there's sort of that spirit to it of looking to somebody else outside you for an example of how to be or different ways of being in the world. And one thing that really struck me when you write about mentorship is you are oftentimes when people talk about mentorship, it's everybody wants a mentor and they think, oh, the mentor is going to be the mentor is the active one. The mentor is the one sharing wisdom and giving guidance and making phone calls or whatever it is. But when you write about it, I mean, that's all there, of course, but the agency is coming from you, where you're the one, you talk about it very explicitly, like you're actively putting yourself in positions to get mentors and like making it happen, which I think is, I, I think about this at working at Film Independent, where mentorship is key to what we do, and providing mentorship to filmmakers, and the role of mentorship in filmmaking is so critical. And I just love the way you write about it, that it was like something that you were just actively determined to get. And I don't know if you'd want to share anything further about that.
Yeah, well, that's I've never heard this is so awesome because I've never heard anyone put it that way, and it makes sense that it on the outside it seems like a mentorship is like it's a two-way street, of course, but it is like a giving and a receiving. And I think the way that I had to see it and the way we're allowed to see it is rather like you know, someone like foraging through the forest for like mushrooms or something like wild that's in there and they're in there, but you still have to make the effort to like find them. And I think what is useful about that is that it gives us mentees or people, which anyone can be mentored at any age. And I think it's a muscle we don't need to outgrow, but we have agency, right? It's not just like waiting for help. And I think that that came from like a core feeling as a child that like I wasn't going to get it if I waited for it. It just wouldn't happen, but I could seek it out. And the worst thing that could happen is someone says no or like doesn't isn't as generous as you think they're going to be. But in that case, I tried, and I think we all are allowed to use our imagination to still get things from people by way of admiring them from afar and imitating them. Like that's satellite mentorship.
Mhm.
And I think it's so useful and it feels like suddenly we have more control. And maybe that was just all I was looking for was like a little bit more control. And it's
Mhm.
interesting you talk about the film independent programs and that mentorship because um this I love being able to talk about the film world because I remember when we went to South by with Olympic Dreams, and I got to spend some time with Janet Pearson because I stayed for a few weeks afterwards. And she was like, you guys really made the most of this time here because I don't know, I think it was in my nature to like not just follow the program, but like seek out, even like a coffee with Janet, for example. And I think that opportunities it's wonderful if we're given opportunities but there's also I think it can come from us and I think that's really a piece of it um that we might as well do like it's like if you're in the if you can why wouldn't you reach for it as much as it's being handed to you,
Mhm.
right? I mean, does it make you
Yeah.
feel like it's not something you can like spoon feed to somebody but I do think to like know that the muscle is coming from the mentee also, right? The one that asks or like seeks.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, I find that, in film, or my experience of it is, I love it when you have somebody really seeking it out in that way and really exploiting it in the right, taking advantage of it so fully. And um, those are the people where it feels good. It feels like um, it's rewarding to both parties, and
right.
um, it's a relationship. I mean, you have this incredible story of I think it was when you were in college, your poetry professor, when you went to her house for dinner, and that experience of like just the way you described this night and what that meant to you, and seeing her in this way. I mean, it's kind of an intangible thing. You're having dinner with a professor, but it had this kind of profound impact on you. As the way you write about that, it's clear how meaningful that was to you and how empowering it was in ways that were probably unexpected to, or she probably wouldn't even think of, right?
Yeah, you don't, I think we don't understand, we don't predict like how an energy exchange is a very real thing too.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so it's like confidence can be given and received just like advice could be given and received. And that's why these opportunities to like, pair someone with a mentor like are very important, not just for the raw knowledge of like how did you get from point A to point B, but more because you want to transfer like confidence, energy, and what were they thinking? Like what are thought processes? And I think something that could be mistaken about a memoir is like that you're meant to imitate what this person did, when really I think you're meant to imitate what this person, how they thought. And that's probably the best way to receive mentorship also, because you're never going to do exactly what your mentor did, but you want to understand how you can think like them, or how you can walk, how you can feel like them rather than just do exactly what they did, right?
Yeah,
That's not the point of it.
right. Again, that was something, I mean, it runs through the whole book, is this notion of, I feel like a lot of what you're talking about in the book is like, it's an ongoing process of finding your authentic self and being authentic to who you actually are. And so you're looking at these outside sources. And I mean, so much of what you write about is grow your development as a runner, and then your running career, but you're getting input and advice from different people and kind of weighing it and seeing like, is this right for me? Like you had those high school coaches who were telling you you had to forego everything else except running, and you rejected that. You had somehow you had the wherewithal to know that wasn't the right path. And then other times you had people, the coach telling you to go to Mammoth, to leave Eugene. Like you're having to field all this advice and input and figure out what is true to who you are authentically. And again, I bring everything back to film since we're film independent, but it is like, that is the heart of independent film. Like the thing people should focus on is not to copy somebody else's exact trajectory, but find out how to develop their own authentic voice and their own path to getting a film made, or whatever it is that they're trying to do.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And that like, with film or like with any art, right? It's not a like we want to matter in the world, we want to change the world. And I think that the coolest thing to realize is that and this came directly from advice that I got from someone, which was like, it's okay if I work for a nonprofit or not. It's okay if I pursue my Olympic dreams or my film dreams. It's okay as long as I'm not doing something that like hurts people. If I'm manifesting the greatest version of myself, I'm probably going to have like a positive impact in the world. And I think like for artists to hear that is so important, because it can feel like kind of strange sometimes to be like, I want to tell a story that like feels true to me and is uniquely my own and is really specific. It can feel self-indulgent, but the truth is that like, one, the more specific we get, the better the product. But two, if that's the greatest manifestation of yourself, you will be doing good in the world. You will be contributing to it. And I don't know who needs to hear that, but if somebody does, I think it's like a good thing to just say, because otherwise we can feel strange for pursuing the arts like this, or for like you said, finding your voice, right?
Mhm.
Um,
So, Alexi, I got to know you first as a filmmaker, and of course, I knew you were an athlete and a runner. You were an Olympian. It's a big part of who you are in your story. But one of the things that's shocking in reading this book, like the book is focused more on your, I mean, it's about your whole life, but a lot of it is on your identity as a runner and how you trained and grew and developed and kind of your trajectory there, which is, you know, inherently interesting and important in its own right. But throughout the book, there are these moments where you refer to like, oh, and at that time I was, you know, making my first feature. And then we were, you know, Jeremy was selling our first feature. And it's like, this is huge stuff. Like, it's so hard to make a movie. You could have done a different memoir just about your, like, how you pursued filmmaking. And so I'll try and turn this into a question, which is just, I'm curious how you today, you know, you're doing a lot of different things. You're an author, you're a filmmaker, you're an athlete. Um, how do you, I mean, do you identify primarily as a runner? Is that kind of the through line for you where you're doing other things, or you identify as all of it equally and it just depends what's happening?
yeah, it's a good question, and it's something I've like I have to ask and answer to myself first and all the time, and it can shift. So for me, early on in like before I met you, after I met that poetry professor and I decided to like pursue this Olympic career, I was really thoughtful about wanting to separate the two, the like creative world and the athletic world. And that was because, I mean, and this is like very, I don't know, insider baseball in some ways, but I didn't want someone in the running world to be like, she's an okay runner, but she also like does these films, so like together that's great. Or she's an okay filmmaker, but she also is an Olympian, so together that's great. I wanted those to stand on their own platforms, in their own worlds, in their own ways at first, because I felt that at least for me, it was important to like achieve some sort of like success in both separate from one another. I guess I just didn't want them to have to like be an excuse for the other, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so at first, when I was like in my running world, I wanted like all my running related affiliated, you know, my sponsors, all that to only focus on my running, or I didn't ask them so much about the film world. And same, even though Tracktown was set in the running world, I wanted it to be, you know, at a festival with other films. I didn't want to like have it like live in just the running world. And then after that, I think I've grown up and felt more confident embracing like both identities as one. And also, you know, I've had some challenging moments where I am like, look, I love to act. Um, I I love it and I love to write. Will I be okay entering this Hollywood world with the background that I have in running? Will people accept that? Because I didn't come up in the same way that other people did. And I will say that in the beginning of my, like, you know, even when we first moved to LA, I wasn't sure how much of those identities I wanted to like own up to.
Hmm.
And I think I've come to be more okay with like exactly who I am, which is that, you know, I am a sponsored athlete. I'm running. Um, I'm also filming a movie in April and I'm very excited about it. And I think I feel more confident doing that. But I think it would be a miscommunication if I said that I always felt comfortable with everything being presented as one, you
Yeah,
know? That's
right.
just the truth. Where like, and I don't know if I was wrong or I was right, but I do think it was important that I pursued each of those tracks, like kind of like separated them for a while before I let the identity meld. What do you think? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Um, in the book, you go deep in describing your trajectory as a runner and like things that you learned along the way, ways that you dealt with like developing your relationship with pain. I think is an amazing section of the book. I mean, anyone who is a runner or remotely athletic should read this book because it's fascinating for that. But beyond that, anyone pursuing a, you know, a creative life, I think we should read it because it's got the same. There's so much that just crosses over. But that was a big thing I wanted to ask you is aside from having those two different pursuits where, and you're describing how you wanted to pursue them separately on their own merits, I'm curious if the tools that you developed as a runner, like, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this. In the book, you talk about how, as a runner, you learned how to cope with pain, with training, with food, with there's so much that, with your sponsors, like there's so much that you have to navigate just as a runner of how to sustain yourself and grow and have longevity and a sustainable career, all those things. I'm curious how much of those things translate for you in the filmmaking world, where you're able to, when you're making a movie, you're like, okay, this is what I do when I'm training for a race and I'm dealing, like pacing myself, sleep, like all those nuts and bolts training tools that you developed as a runner. Did they help you in filmmaking, or did you develop other ones in that space?
Yeah, that is, yes, they both have helped each other. And I'll tell you specifically, so running or sports, like in running particularly, you rarely like win a race. Like I've won plenty of races, but I've also gotten 17th place and still broke a national record. And so I think you get used to like not winning or not getting everything as a part of a process. And so I think in terms of like, no pitches, like someone says no, that happens a million times, right? Or not getting a part, like these things don't bother me because it's a part of the process. And so I think I know how to fall down and get back up and even spin the narrative to this is just a part of success. Like, and I think that comes from the athlete mentality of like, athletes always like to feel like winners. And so no matter what happens, we're going to spin the narrative in a way where we feel like a winner. And there's like, I don't know if there's like an ego there or if it's just why not write the narrative so that if you don't get into this festival, but eventually you get into this one and this, a festival was your dream and you didn't get, like, you will create the narrative for yourself if you would like to, as to why that didn't happen and why it was all in your favor all along by making the most of opportunity B. Does that make sense? Where it's like, so I think it helps with like endurance in filmmaking, which like so many people who make it in their film careers or make it sustainable or make the project of their dreams, it's because they turned the obstacles into maybes. They didn't see it as a reason why they could not do this craft at all. And a lot of people, it becomes a hobby because they feel that they it just simply was impossible. And so I think the athletic stuff has helped just with the mindset, with the discipline. Like I know how to wake up and show up to practice every day. And like writer's block, for example, people like talk about it and I'm like, well, I don't feel great every day of training, but there are things that I can do to make it the best day possible. Like I wear an outfit that makes me feel powerful. I find a great trail. I'm with a training partner. Like, and you can set yourself up as a writer in the same way where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to write the greatest pages today, but I will be writing with like the pencil I love or the computer that I love in the space that I know is maybe going to work, with the food that I know that makes me feel good. Like you set it up just like you're about to prepare for training. And I think that helps. And then the other way is that filmmaking is so complicated at times, like getting, the people dynamics, the like all the steps that it takes, that when I started trying to make Tracktown and then Olympic Dreams, and then I went back to like running, seriously training for a period of time, I remember running felt a lot simpler because I was like, oh, all I have to do is like not stop. It's like, that's so simple. And so I think they balance each other out because for different reasons.
Fascinating. One thing I was thinking about with running and filmmaking. So in running, of course, there is a social aspect. I mean, you have like a coach, you have your teammates, the people you're competing against. There are other people, but in some sense, it feels like a very solitary. It's you running. It's you in your body, going all out, right? And you train. There's something inherently solitary about that. Whereas with filmmaking, even on a low budget indie, it's the most social thing you can do. You are so reliant on people for every aspect. You have people reading your script, actors, production designers,
Yeah.
location scouts. It requires this enormous team. And I'm wondering, does it feel very, I mean, this is maybe I'm asking the same question again, but I'm just wondering how you navigate those differences. Do they feel the same to you, or do you,
Yeah, running at its best is a team sport. Like at its best, you have an environment where you're training with people and you have a time when practice starts, even if you're just meeting one person. And it can feel like a group effort. Like you and your coach have these common goals, but you each play different roles in the equation, just like in filmmaking. So I think and even in my most profound moments, like I was on teams that won NCAA titles in college, and the reason why we won was because the other girls and I figured out a way to turn it into a team sport. And so I think I'm always, and that's why I went from like studying poetry in college to filmmaking, was because I wanted teams. So
mhm,
I think the truth is that at its best they're similar in that way, but there are also moments where I am very thankful for each one for what it is, meaning like I like that in the filmmaking world I can respect and admire and team up with someone whose entire world is sound design and they're so brilliant at it and they bring this strength, right?
yeah,
And on the other side, sometimes it's refreshing in the running world to be like, I can execute this whole workout all by myself. So they're
right,
different also, and I'll admit that. And I think I appreciate them each. Um,
mhm,
and you know, maybe what it is that like it's a pleasure to be around the top of any world, meaning it's a pleasure to watch someone work in the film world when they are really dedicated or excellent at their specific task. It's joyful, right, to experience that.
yeah,
And I don't know. I
yeah,
mean, you can experience that in any world at all. I think it's just that's one of the joys of life is meeting people in their element and in experiencing their element with them.
yeah, 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 absolutely. Um, well, one of the central things in this book that you write about is after the Olympics, you went into a really serious clinical depression for a period of time that was no joke. And you write, I mean, you write so openly and honestly and transparently about what you went through, which I think there's a lot of stigma associated with, well, depression and mental health in general, and especially for people in the public eye, people who are quote unquote successful or have a lot of accomplishment often don't want to talk about it or feel it's not safe. So I think it's remarkable how open you are with that. But I mean, can you just elaborate for someone who hasn't read the book a little bit about that part of your
Yeah.
story?
Yeah. So I grew up like kind of in ingesting this narrative that like with my mom who took her own life, that she was just so sick that she had to go and that she was unhelpable. And it was a tough narrative to like grow up with because I was like, well, if this ever happens to me, does that mean like what does that mean for me? And I think that's scary. And it did happen. And I think the reason why it happened, so mine was like a situational depression, which is like when you're okay, and then a series of like changes or something happens and you feel like you've fallen off a cliff. And the cliff for me was that I did not think about the moment after the Olympics, and so few people do, because if you did, you may never make it there in the first place. And I had spent so much of my life chasing, I think, external accomplishments to solve what, avoid, um, with my mom feeling like not understanding why she left and feeling like maybe I didn't matter enough for her to stay. And so external accomplishments were a good way to feel like I mattered. But when the biggest one, the Olympics, was over, I suddenly I wanted to know what was next, and I wanted to know like yesterday. And I think a lot of us can feel that way, even making a film where like you put so much of your time into something and when it's over, you're like maybe you're relieved, but then you're also, it's easy to feel this kind of dip. And if I was prepared for the dip that every Olympian feels, then I would have accepted it and I would have been like, okay, there's an adrenal fatigue associated with this dip. I need to like take some actions to let myself recover. But
Mhm.
because nobody talked about it, I pressed on and tried to push through it. And it was interesting, and I mentioned this in the book, but I've, met people in the entertainment world who, have hosted the Oscars and then have the same feeling afterwards. And I think the truth is that it happens. It's not bad that it happens. It's like kind of normal. It's just, I think I needed to understand that it's sort of like an injury that you can get, or it can become an injury if you ignore it. And I did ignore it because I didn't want to be like my mom. And then I learned the hard way, how to navigate out of it. And I think part of the reason why I wrote Bravey was to give people some of the vocabulary and tools that I learned eventually that would have made it a lot simpler. So
Yeah,
it's a long-winded answer to your question.
I feel like that's a good description of the book. And one of the other things I like about it is it feels like there's a continuity when you're describing becoming a runner, and like throughout your book, it's like you pursue something and you learn how to do it, and you develop tools that help you, and that goes through the running, and then it goes through how you responded to the depression. And it's not like a clean straight line. It's like you try different things. You saw like a life coach, and you saw a therapist who did work and didn't work, and like
Yep.
the different kinds of input, and being able to see that up close the way you describe it, I find incredibly helpful and interesting.
Thank you. Well,
Which,
I
which,
hope I hope it helps. Well, I hope it helps people to um to simply understand that like we're not going to feel great all the time, but like the really life-saving thing I learned was that actions change first, then thoughts, then feelings, in that order. And that blew my mind because, my understanding was that my mom and even myself, like we tried to like force our feelings and force our feelings. And the truth is that it's going to come from action.
mhm.
And, that applies to anything we're doing in life, right? Like we're not going to feel amazing every day of putting even a film project together. That's just kind of normal in the artistic journey, but we're still going to like take actions that might eventually shift our feelings, or so hopefully that little
Yeah.
thing helps people too.
Well, that leads me to my next question, which is a little bit outside the scope of the book, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on it, which is, how are you doing navigating this pandemic and the
Yeah.
forced isolation and the disruption to our pursuits and routines, to put it mildly? So many people I know, including myself, it's right, we're serious depression running through this, and grief and sadness and anger and all the rest of it. And some exhilaration. There's these moments of beauty, or just good things that are happening at the same time. But I'm just curious, anything you want to say about how Alexi's getting through COVID, and how sort of your skills as a runner are
Yeah.
factoring into this?
Yeah. Well, I've never been like a great person to like cry to, and that's not, I don't know if that makes me like the best of friends. I'm always like, well, this is a challenge. What are we going to do? And, I'm all about the like mindset that if it wasn't, if we don't accomplish a million things today because of the way we're feeling, then that's acceptable. And I think it's because it follows the same principle of I just want to try my best. And like that's the feeling that I want before I go to bed, is not how many boxes have I ticked, but like did I try my best today? Because that's all we can ask of ourselves. And it just looks differently right now because there's so much that has shifted. And so I'm trying to like accept things that I cannot control because it's just not useful, right? Like I cannot, like last year the Olympics got pushed. Some of our creative projects seem to be like on the back burner because they're just not COVID friendly projects. And I'm going to move on. I'm not going to like labor thinking about things I can't control. But I'm trying to still try my best, even if some of these days it's like 100% of like crap. You know what I mean? It's like I'm giving my best of like crap, and that's okay too. Um so that's like the practical answer of like we still show up,
Yeah.
it just might look differently. And that's okay. That is just that happened, that is okay. And also accepting that the world is having a moment that's really different, and people are, united in some ways. That has made me try to think outside my bubble a little bit, because I can be really like in an incubator, like training or making a move, like I can be really inward facing. And I
Mhm.
think the pandemic has challenged me to like look outside a little bit more. And that's not the worst thing in the world for me to like be doing. So I've tried to also embrace some of the moments where I feel connected with people that I've never, been connected with before.
Mhm.
And you know what I mean? Like where it's like,
Yeah.
that's different for some artists to experience. And so I've tried to like embrace that and be curious about this time as to like what is different about this time that I maybe like can keep for life. What is some different about this time that we'll leave behind? That's okay too.
Right.
Um, so maybe it's like, I'm not going to say there are no regrets, because there are definitely regrets about this time in general, but there are a lot of lessons, right? And that's probably the best thing we can take out of anything we make, or of any period of time in our life, is like, what are the lessons rather than the regrets? And I'm
Mhm.
I'm trying to like think in those terms as best I can.
Yeah. 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 Yesterday, I was on a work call. A bunch of It was like a staff meeting at Film Independent, and we were talking about how this experience is for us, kind of just a check in. And somebody said they used a running metaphor, which I thought was interesting. They were talking about specifically what like work feels like right now, and they said
Mhm.
it feels like we're running a marathon, but we're sprinting the whole time. We're sprinting a marathon, and it's not sustainable. It's like
Yeah.
there's so much activity, and we're doing this and we're doing that, and but it just goes on and on because there's no end in sight yet on this. And
Yeah.
I do feel like it's something I have to look at. I think probably all of us do. It's like, how do you pace yourself in this crazy time? you know you you want to be active, you want to be doing things, you want to be surviving and growing, but it's an odd moment where like a sprint and a marathon collapse into each other, and you've got to kind of pick one or the other, or
Yeah.
learn how to balance them.
Yeah, that's true. And to maybe um you know I I've I've been able to, I think also we can accept, man, like I mean truthfully, I've been working on some of my own like weaknesses, like whether it's as an athlete or otherwise, because there's been some understanding that like the peaks of the worlds that I'm in like might not happen, like meaning a race or being able to shoot the movie. It's like, well, maybe I can make the script that much better because I'm not rushing into production. Or so I'm like, I'm still trying to, and I don't know that that really responds to the sprint marathon thing, because that certainly would be impossible, right?
Yeah.
Um, Maybe it's like we have to accept the reality that like we don't know where the finish line is, but we are still like in control of our own legs and our own pace, keeping in mind that like we will not know the finish line. So stop looking for it every single day. Like, is that, I mean, I don't know that that's the answer or not. But I certainly think, as it relates to mental health, what was most helpful to me was when my doctor was like, look, you're going to be sad every day for a long time. And it was almost, and he was comparing it to a physical injury, which it is. And he was like, if you had a broken leg, you would expect that you're going to wake up in pain every day for a long time, but it doesn't mean you're not healing. And you
Mhm.
can't know exactly when that bone is like going to be healed, but you're in the process, it's going to hurt every day. And so maybe, it's not telling us to settle. It's just saying like, keep doing the actions that are going to lead us out of here, but like we cannot control the exact finish line.
Right.
Maybe,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
don't
think
know.
that's where we are.
Endless optimist over here. It's like, I don't know. Oh,
It
it's
really is.
oh
In your
yeah.
book, there's like I should have written down a list of them, but there's so many moments where you're looking back on something that was like a tough moment or just something not ideal. And it's not like you're putting a false positive spin on it, but you do find, I don't know, you just find a way of looking at somebody or some episode with some understanding or, again, compassion. Like you talk about the girl who, I think it was in high school, who was, or maybe it was college, who was like a bully to you. Was, I think you call her Blythe. And
Yes.
then, but like, and
Super
she
good.
really sounds like she did some pretty shitty things to you, and you tell that like unvarnished. But then you, like, somewhere you go, she was, you see her as being, as suffering, as being in pain. Like you
Right.
immediately
Yeah.
see like what was driving her to do that.
And
And
and that was more in retrospect, but in the moment I had to just separate myself from her. So I think like it was, more, it's hard to like really hate someone if you like know that they're in pain, or if you wouldn't want to be them. If it's like, look, that situation is much more challenging than mine. Um, Something that, I know we like briefly spoke about before our coffee. We were making the coffee, okay? Everyone, we had to make the coffee. Was like, I've had this thing in my head, and I don't know that we're gonna answer it here, but I genuinely felt like I had like a mastery over words with this book, or like I really like I loved finding the words to describe an experience in a way that I hoped would communicate, and it felt so satisfying to be like, that was my best way to communicate this
mhm,
thing, and I want that feeling. I think I'm still developing, as a screenwriter. I think I'm good, but I think that I still want that feeling with a script where it's like, that I I've done what I can do to like communicate that. And I don't have an answer to that. I'm just telling you it's
yeah,
something that I want, and I recognize it's a discipline and I can work on it and learn, but it's something that I so want to feel out of a script.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, so we have some questions I want to get to, but before we do that, I just want to ask you to, however much you're willing to share on this. I'm curious. Of course, we don't know what's going to go on with the vaccine and COVID, but what do you have planned? You mentioned a film that you're going to be shooting. Could you, anything you can share about your upcoming film projects and
Mhm.
upcoming in terms of running?
Mhm. So I have a television project that is in development with NBC that is sports in nature, and I'm really excited about that. And I think I've accepted and embraced fully that I will always want to like be writing about sports in some of my projects because I can and I enjoy it. Then this project that I'm shooting in April is an indie film that I am making with Jeremy Teicher, my partner, and I almost said your name, and you, and Matt Walsh.
Oh, Matt
Um,
Walsh. Oh, great.
yeah, and
Great.
that's been so fun. We're making it uh as it's like an indie comedy, and it's going to be great. And that was actually born out of both his fascination for Olympic dreams and our process there with Nick Kroll, and also out of COVID, because the project is shot in one location. It is much, it is a COVID, designed project to be safe. And it's about an artist in residency, and that's all I'll say for now about that, but it's gonna be great, and we're shooting it in April. Um, and
And how
then
on the running front?
yes, so I'm running, I'm still sponsored, I'm still training. Um, it's unclear, like, when races will normalize, just like it's unclear with, like, film sets. There are some races, and so I think I will race this year. It I always say, like, Tokyo is still on my mind. It's just, given the reality of the world, I need to control what I can and then see where it goes. So in that sense, I do feel really lucky that I can, work on creative projects while waiting for some of these races to happen. So that's the truth about that. Uh,
That's great.
but yeah, I'm excited. Um, I think this film is gonna be fun in April, and that was one of those, like, I wanna feel like a winner, I'm gonna try to make something that's possible right now.
Mhm. That's great.
Yeah.
So we've got a few questions here. I'm going to start with one from Alva, who says, highly fascinating. I didn't know the world of elite sport is so similar in the process to the world of filmmaking. My question, Would you recommend aspiring filmmakers take up sporting activities to learn or help with teamwork, dealing with rejection, defeat, etc.? Great
You,
question.
you can, but I think you can also just like flip your switch any moment you learn something epiphanal, and like you can go through the exercise of learning it how I learned it, or you can simply accept the lesson that I learned as like your lesson. And I think that's like a shortcut we're allowed to take in life. Where like, oh no, from now on, I think about, my challenges in filmmaking like an athlete would think about like losing a soccer game. It's a part of it. So like you don't have to play soccer to have that lesson, but you can, if it's like, right? If it's useful to you, all the
Next question from Matt. He says, do you have any thoughts about the connection between the physical body and creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that this might be a more academic answer than you want, but I think that both physical pursuits and mental pursuit, like writing and training for running, for example, are disciplines, meaning like we might be born with gifts or genes, but we can't know or control those. And the best thing to feel is that we're allowed to be a student of ourselves as athletes and as creatives. So I think that's the very useful answer. In terms of like more like how, like moving your body might help creativity. I think there's chemical proof that moving your body is good for your brain, and that they would definitely seemingly help one another. So I think both of those answers are the ones.
Next question is from somebody named Rachel, who asks, I'm so excited to buy the book. Where would you like us to purchase it?
Oh, Rachel, that's so sweet of you. I hope you do buy the book. I've been trying to get people to buy them from their local bookstore. Like if you're in LA, I did an event with Romans, which people really love. I think if it's not at your local bookstore, they can just order it and they'll have it in a couple days. And that's what I'm gonna say. But of course, Amazon also has the book. It's like
yeah. And then one more question from the audience. Did you seek out a book deal or were you approached for one? Curious how the publishing part of all this works.
Yeah. Okay. Publishing a book, I think it can happen in two ways. It can happen like an indie film where you make the thing and then you try and sell it, which is often how independent films happen, or that's how my independent films have happened. But my book was more like the television process where I was working. I mean, I work with a literary agent and we put together a proposal, which is not unlike, a pitch for a TV show. And it had a sample chapter. It had roughly what the emotional arc of the book would be. And then we went to like many publishers and met them and then had offers. And that is, I feel very lucky for that. But you can have it happen either way. So just because that doesn't happen doesn't mean you can't write your book.
Mm-hmm. Great.
You can, but yeah, I hope that if you are writing a book, that you get an editing team that's wonderful, because they are different creatures than the writers. They have that. They're like they're editors, just like for a movie where they have a zoomed out lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question just came in from Anitra asking, do you have any collaboration with Greece in any way?
Uh-oh.
What? Did I freeze up there on you?
It went frozen, but I see. Do you have any collaboration with Greece in any way?
Yeah.
So, well, we just found out yesterday the book is being published in Greece and will be in Greek. I run for the country of Greece. So I go there and train. And I actually went there to train this time last year and got stuck in Greece for 5 months during the beginning of the pandemic. And that was really wild. And then we have some wonderful film mentors there. A good, friend, Christos Konstantikopoulos, is a producer and a writer out there that he's actually introduced me to some of the mentors that I have now. So there's a lot of like creative and athletic roots that I have there. And I I want to spend more time there. I think it's a wonderful place.
Beautiful. You were there for 5 months during COVID?
I mean, I
Wow.
went there thinking I was going for 2 weeks
Ah,
and 2 or 3, and it was, like, literally this week last year, and Greece is so close to Italy, and at that time, Italy was, like, the worst COVID situation, and
right.
Greece shut down and closed the borders, and I couldn't leave, and so I stayed, and I basically, like, had a life there for, 5 months, and it was like, it was very challenging, but really beautiful, and I would have never had that opportunity otherwise. That's another one of those COVID things where it's like, I don't
Yeah,
know, or, like, my brother, like, lost his job and then started a company, and he would have never done that, and so I think
right.
things that happened out of things that were uncomfortable sometimes, created something new, and I hope that there's more of those stories, than the more, devastating ones.
Yeah. Well, Alexi, the word inspiring is so overused, and people just use it in ways where it almost becomes meaningless sometimes. But I want to say I found Bravey a really genuinely inspiring book. And it's inspiring because it's so nuts and bolts. Like, you talk about what you went through from like early childhood to today in terms of like navigating friendships and mentorships and being an athlete and being a creative person, where you reveal the things that didn't work and the false starts, and then the things that do work. And like, it's just kind of a no BS approach to describing how you operate in the world, that is inspiring. Because you can I just encourage people to, if you haven't read the book, go buy it, go to Romans, go wherever. And the book is, whether you're a filmmaker or an athlete or neither, it's a really genuinely inspiring book. So because it's honest and and just truthful. So thank you so much for taking time for this conversation. I'd love talking to you about it. My dog is whimpering
So
behind me
cute.
there. But yeah, thank you so much. I love talking to you about it. And there's lots of stuff in the book we didn't even get to. There's a whole other theme running through the book. It's less pronounced, but when you write about food, I can tell you are a food lover. And it's just these little references to food pop up throughout. Where
As with my movies, I think. It's like,
So,
oh, I'm
Alexi,
so
thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you and talk to you, and congratulations on a great book.
Thank you so much, Josh, and to Film Independent for having me. I'm going to continue to seek out your mentorship in the years to come. So I hope that's okay with you too. Now you know why.
I think I'm going to flip the table and seek mentorship from you.
Thank you.
Great.
I'm
Thanks,
so
Alexi. Talk to you
grateful.
soon.